Are you curious about how North Korea became one of the poorest countries in the world? Well, let me tell you a story that might just shock you. In 1996, North Korea's government decided to implement a massive mountain goat breeding program to address the famine crisis in the harsh northern region. That sounds like a good idea, right? But what happened next was catastrophic. The goat population tripled within 2 years and caused devastation beyond imagination. The goats devoured the shrubs, which held the mountain soil together, causing massive mudslides that destroyed arable land and flooded coal mines. The consequences were dire, resulting in a loss of 5 to 10% of the population in just 4 years. So how did this decision lead to North Korea's economic struggles, and what other mistakes did the government make? Keep watching to find out. North Korea's reputation today is mainly associated with its impoverished citizens and its leadership's focus on developing nuclear weapons to maintain power. However, this is a relatively recent development, and in the past, North Korea was more advanced than its southern counterpart. Historically, Korea has been a shrimp among whales, constantly surrounded by more powerful nations. For 10 centuries, Korea was a tributary state to China's powerful dynasties. But as China declined and European powers began to conquer the world, Japan emerged as a new Asian power and threatened Korea in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In response to Japan's unchecked influence, Korea turned to the Russian Empire, which sought to expand its influence in the region. With Russia's assistance, Korea underwent industrialization, education system reforms, and modernization of its military. However, the declining state of the Russian Empire was exemplified by its defeat in the Russo-Japanese War in 1904. After its humiliating defeat, Korea was unable to resist Japan's colonization in 1910. Japan brutalized Korea until 1945, though some significant economic growth did occur. Northern Korea is known for being extremely resource-rich, with a Goldman Sachs report estimating 10 trillion in mineral deposits. Japan built large mine and processing plants, a thriving fertilizer industry, countless reservoirs, and pumping stations to irrigate the field, as well as modern power plants to ship war supplies to Japan, improving infrastructure nationwide. The end of Japan's occupation came when 1.5 million Soviet troops invaded Manchuria in the final months of World War II, to seize as much land as possible before the Japanese surrendered. The United States destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki simultaneously. After a few weeks, the largest war in the history ended, but a new longer war began. Korea was split in half, becoming the new Cold War front, much like Germany after the war. The Soviet Union quickly appointed Kim Il-sung, a wartime guerrilla fighter who later became a Soviet army officer during Korea's liberation, to lead the North. He quickly built a Soviet-style command economy, redistributed land, nationalized Japanese industries, established a socialist central bank, and formed a one-party communist state. Kim Il-sung II became North Korea's God King, while the US controlled the South, which was a brutal dictatorship. The North had the most natural resources, industrial capacity, and 90% of electrical power generation. North Korea was the most industrialized and urbanized nation after World War II, but Japan industrialized the North, and most consumer-light industry and prime agricultural land were in the South, which was Japan's wartime breadbasket. As a result, North Korea suddenly lacked farmland to feed its people. Kim Il-sung II invaded the South in 1950 with Soviet and later Chinese support, fearing that the South, backed by the world's largest economy, would catch up. The North was pushed back to the Chinese border by UN combat forces, which defied expectations. China sent 500,000 soldiers to the Korean peninsula to prevent a capitalist foothold, and the front lines stagnated for years. Neither side saw a way to advance, so an armistice was signed, keeping the US at war with North Korea. Kim Il-sung II miscalculated, and the US's carpet bombing campaigns erased most of North Korea's advantages. The US dropped more explosives on North Korea than any other nation during World War II, leading to the disappearance of modern Japanese mines and industries. North Korea was virtually destroyed as an industrial society, according to Charles K. Armstrong. Afterward, Kim completed the command economy, with the state taking control of all private and farmland. Markets and most freedoms were outlawed, except for the ruling class. The government controlled all prices, goods, funds and jobs similar to the Soviet Union. However, even with the help of the Soviets and North Korea's less advanced technology, this system was not efficient. To make matters worse, under Japanese occupation, no native Koreans held significant administrative positions, resulting in a severe lack of experience and the inability to produce accurate economic statistics. Therefore, a socialist government deciding every aspect of the economy was bound to fail. How can you produce steel without knowing how much iron is being made, how much coal is being transported to factories, and how many workers you have? How do you price food without knowing how many mouths to feed or how productive your farmlands are? Despite these challenges, North Korea's economic golden age from the end of the war to the 1970s was remarkable, with the economy growing 15% per year, surpassing the agrarian economy of the South. This was due to unique circumstances, including Kim Sung's second religious desire to rule the nation, rewriting history, banning religion, persecuting political opponents, and manipulating Marxist-Leninist theories to fit Korean beliefs. Self-reliance, Jewish ideology underpinned the new political dominance, inspired by Korean Confucianism, hierarchy-based order, and social harmony. The state and Kim were portrayed as patriarchs through propaganda, and social control over North Korea was perfected by a deeply ingrained culture of family and respecting elders. Ironically, North Korea's resurgence was entirely dependent on massive aid from other socialist nations, including Soviet hydroelectric dams, railroads, irrigation systems, and industrial equipment, as well as Chinese food, oil, and fertilizer. North Korea received $1.65 billion in Soviet patronage from 1950 to 1960. China and the Soviets forgave North Korea's wartime loans and sent tens of thousands of free workers to rebuild infrastructure, factories, and farmlands. North Korea's vast resources, cheap labor, and high commodity demand enabled it to make quick money selling raw materials to other socialist nations. By the early 1960s, the economy was larger than ever and producing exponentially more than South Korea, which was just beginning to build heavy industry. North Korea's unprecedented growth hid the abhorrent structural flaws and catastrophic economic decisions that would make it the world's worst place to live. From the start, Kim Il-sung was obsessed with building heavy industry to give economic self-reliance. The heavy industry involves capital-intensive large-scale manufacturing with heavy machinery and facilities, steel, military equipment, ships, chemicals, construction, etc. Kim's heavy industry focus hurt consumers' goods and agriculture. North Korea's economic growth was unbalanced, focusing heavily on heavy industry and causing a decline in food production. The nation's lack of arable land and harsh climate made it difficult to produce enough food. The regime's self-reliance ideology prevented North Korea from trading its industrial strength for food, leaving the economy dependent on unsustainable aid from other socialist nations. To address economic shortages caused by its data deficit, North Korea launched the Kolyma movement, mobilizing the population to work harder and longer to achieve superhuman productivity. This led to social control, and not complying with the extra work could put individuals in danger. North Korea built massive power plants in the 1960s to meet energy goals, but the regime avoided expensive equipment, relying on brute force to solve economic problems. The country's heavy reliance on labor movements further strained the economy. North Korea's self-reliance meant massive military spending, leading to the militarization of its entire culture, with all men and women aged 50 to 45 required to serve in the military. This harmed the rest of the economy. In the 1970s, North Korea took a massive debt to finance heavy industry and military expansion, borrowing billions of dollars that it could not pay back. Despite its vast resources, North Korea failed to balance its budget and address its economic issues. South Korea's economic success and transition to democracy in the 1980s were remarkable, given the country's political instability. The North Korean regime's grip on power could be weakened if North Koreans saw the improvements in the South's quality of life and a growing middle class. In a historic first, the South outperformed the North, as symbolized by the 1988 Seoul Olympics. In response, the North engaged in terrorism, assassination attempts, and mega projects that were expensive, unnecessary, and fraught from the start. The Ruigyong Hotel, the tallest in the world, was a particularly iconic failure that cost 2% of the economy. By the early 1990s, North Korea's lopsided economy heavily military spending debt, and reliance on other socialist states were about to collapse. The Soviet Union's collapse and China's reforms meant that North Korea had lost its allies, while trading and aid plummeted and preferential oil rates were stopped. Coal mining, power plants, and fertilizer production were hit by fuel shortages. Without power, transportation and industry stopped, causing a 50% economic decline in 3 years. Harvests were hard to transport, and food was no longer free from other socialist nations. Millions died in North Korea, where a brutal totalitarian regime ruled over land with no food, freedom, or hope. A nation should borrow to weather the storm in this case, but North Korea's debt reputation after the 1970s prevented it from doing so. Its crippled industry and extreme sanctions from its nuclear programs prevented trade, forcing North Korea to ask for international aid. Despite receiving 70% of all needed food from international humanitarian efforts until 2000, North Korea made outrageous demands, refused concessions, and never reformed to fix structural problems. It first allowed markets and minor trading because the central government had no resources to distribute to the population. North Korea didn't change because they learned from the Soviet Union that opening their economy or political structure even a little would start a never-ending wave of freedom. After the Arab Spring, they tightened social control because they couldn't risk China's economic reforms. North Korean leaders know that reform will improve citizens' lives, but dictatorship reform and revolution never end well for the elites. While the nation starved, next leader Kim Jong-il imported luxury watches, built personal palaces, ordered 100 white Mercedes limousines, and dined on the best Italian food. Changing to save his people would have killed him and ended his limitless consumption. North Korea survives on two things: state-sponsored crime and China. State-sponsored crime includes manufacturing and distributing drugs, fake US currency, weapons to international terrorist organizations, and slave labor in prison camps. North Korea also employs and harbors international criminals, giving them state-sponsored distribution and protection. China now views North Korea as a nuisance, but they don't want a massive humanitarian and nuclear crisis along their border. China supplies energy and food to prevent this. Kim Jong-un has kept North Korea unchanged since 2011 and is trying to rein in the markets that emerged from the 1990s crisis. North Korea's leadership and ideology prevent reform. North Korea is the last socialist command economy from the 20th century. North Koreans suffer until the regime collapses. And that is how North Korea's history of colonialism, war, and communism led to its current economic struggles. From the disastrous mountain goat breeding program to the devastating effects of war and the command economy, the decisions made by North Korea's leadership have had dire consequences for its citizens. It's crucial to understand the country's past to comprehend its present and future. North Korea remains a unique and intriguing country with much to discover, and perhaps one day it will rise from its situation. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more informative content.